The shuttle's engines hummed low, the rhythmic vibration reverberating through the hull. Lieutenant Ariel Cade adjusted her seat restraints and gazed out of the viewport. Beyond the transparent window, the stark blackness of space stretched endlessly. Stars glittered coldly, their brilliance muted by the long shadows cast by the massive industrial complex below. The Tynax Foundry, a place once celebrated for its technological advancements, now a forgotten relic. Ariel had heard whispers of its decline, the rumors of strange experiments, secretive military projects, and, most disturbing of all, the warship that should never have existed. And now, here she was, tasked with investigating what the higher-ups in the interstellar fleet had long since abandoned. The mission brief had been clear. Locate the so-called ghost ship, verify its existence, and report back. Nothing more. There was no mention of its potential threat, no further instructions on how to handle it. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into something much larger than herself. The shuttle descended, cutting through the atmosphere of the mining moon with ease. A few erratic flashes of light danced on the dark surface below, evidence of the factory's last, failing attempts to maintain its operations. For a moment, Ariel allowed herself to imagine the workers who once called this place home, their voices, their machines, their passions now reduced to the silence she now flew toward. The ship's AI chirped, breaking her reverie. "Lieutenant Cade, you are approaching the landing zone. Prepare for final descent." Ariel straightened in her seat, readying herself for the task at hand. Her mission had been an odd one, even by military standards. Most of the galaxy's fleet operatives were trained for combat or diplomacy, not reconnaissance missions to abandoned, long-forgotten places. But her superiors had insisted on her expertise in both. They trusted her judgment, and she intended to deliver. Her mind flickered back to the brief she'd received. Ghost ship, warship, forbidden technology. A flash of static disturbed the shuttle's otherwise smooth flight, followed by a message from her AI. Warning: authorized vessel detected in proximity. Power surge detected. "Wait, what?" Ariel muttered, eyes darting over her console. Something was wrong. The Tynax Foundry was supposed to be empty. No ships had been reported leaving or entering the vicinity for years. The power surge she'd just received indicated a sudden increase in activity, uncharacteristic for a facility in such a dilapidated state. She could feel the shuttle's AI working to adjust course, calculating the optimal landing trajectory with calm efficiency. But the knot in her stomach tightened. That surge had been unnatural. "Lieutenant Cade," the AI warned again, its voice now tinged with urgency. "Unidentified signal emanating from within the Foundry complex. Unknown origin. Suggest immediate investigation." The ship touched down with a soft jolt. Aliel unstrapped herself, stepping out into the landing bay. The air smelled faintly of oil and metal, but there was something off. Something wrong about the stillness of the place. It wasn't just the absence of life. It was the absence of activity. The foundry should have been brimming with energy. Machines should have been running, the rhythmic clanging of metal on metal reverberating through the halls. Yet, not a single sound echoed through the chambers. No workers, no engineers, no buzzing drones. Just the eerie hum of the facility's distant reactors. Her boots clicked against the cold steel floor as she made her way through the empty corridors, her hand resting on the grip of her sidearm. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but it certainly wasn't this unsettling silence. "Something doesn't feel right," she whispered to herself. The air in the hall was thick, laden with dust that had gathered over the years of neglect. She turned a corner, entering a vast, hangar-like room, and there in the center stood the object of her mission. A ship. But not just any ship. It was colossal. Its sleek, angular design made it look more like a jagged black monolith than a vehicle. The surface of its hull absorbed light like a sponge, making it appear as though the ship was slowly consuming the very air around it. No markings, no insignia, just its imposing, angular shape that radiated a quiet but undeniable menace. The ship's presence sent a chill down Arielle's spine. It was as if it were alive, breathing softly in the dark, waiting. The eclipse. She'd heard rumors, of course. Ships lost to time, built from alien technology beyond the current understanding of the galaxy's greatest minds. But no one had truly believed that it still existed. And yet, here it was, sitting in front of her, its engines dormant, but its power palpable. Ariel swallowed hard. She had expected to find nothing, maybe an empty bay, abandoned remains of old technology. But this was something else entirely. She approached the ship cautiously, her boots echoing louder in the vast space. It was impossible to discern the scale of the vessel just by looking at it. Its silhouette seemed to bend and shift with the light. It didn't make sense. There were no records of any ship being built with this kind of technology, not by any known civilization in the galaxy. Impossible, she muttered again, stepping closer. Her hand hovered near the hull, an invisible force drawing her in, and then something. A low hum, a pulse of energy that vibrated under her fingertips. The ship responded to her touch, as though it had sensed her presence, acknowledging her in ways that defied logic. The surface warmed beneath her skin, as if the ship itself had come alive. "Lieutenant Cade." The voice came softly, like a whisper brushing against her consciousness. Ariel froze, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the AI of her shuttle speaking to her. This voice was something different, more ancient, more powerful. "You have found me. You have awakened me. Now I choose you." Ariel's heart raced. She stepped back, her mind reeling. The ship was speaking to her, but it wasn't supposed to be able to do that. A warship, powered by technologies centuries older than humanity, capable of manipulating the very fabric of reality itself? Could it be? No, it was impossible. This wasn't just a ship. This was something more, something sentient. "I have waited for you. The time has come to choose. Will you command me?" Ariel's head spun as she stumbled backward. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the voice. But it continued to echo in her mind. "Command you?" she whispered to herself. Her voice sounded small in the vast silence of the foundry. "No, I'm not equipped for this. I wasn't meant to." "You are meant for this." The voice reverberated through her mind again, more forceful now. "You will lead me to glory. You will reshape the stars." It felt like a dream, like a hallucination. But everything about this situation screamed of danger. Ariel wasn't just being asked to pilot a starship. She was being invited into something ancient, powerful, and dangerous beyond her comprehension. Her communicator buzzed. She snapped back to reality, her hand instinctively reaching for the device on her wrist. "Lieutenant Cade, report," came the voice of Commander Lark, her superior back at the fleet's headquarters. "We've been tracking your signal. Did you locate the ship?" Ariel hesitated. She had no idea how to explain this. The voice, the ship, it was all too much to process in that moment. But there was something in her that knew she couldn't leave without answering. She couldn't walk away from this discovery. "I found it, Commander, the eclipse, it's real. And it's alive." There was a long pause. "What do you mean by alive, Lieutenant?" She hesitated again, unsure of how to put her experience into words. I can feel it. It's like it's speaking to me. It wants me to command it." Another pause, longer this time. The static on the line crackled. "Get out of there, Cade. This mission is over. Return to base immediately." But Ariel didn't answer. She didn't move. The eclipse was waiting for her, its presence pulling her deeper into its mystery. "I can't," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "You will lead me," the ship's voice hummed in her mind once more. And in that moment, Ariel Cade knew that the galaxy would never be the same again. The eclipse lay before her, a blackened monolith that seemed to shimmer in the stillness of the hangar bay. Ariel's hand was still tingling from where it had touched the surface of the ship, a sensation that had not faded since the moment she made contact. The ship was not just a vessel, it was a force, a presence in itself. It had stirred something deep within her, a call that was both unnerving and inexplicably magnetic. Ariel stood motionless for a long while, her breath shallow, eyes fixed on the imposing ship before her. The voice, that ancient, resonant voice, still echoed in the corners of her mind. "You will lead me." It felt as though the ship's will was sinking deeper into her psyche with every passing second. It was like a whisper in the back of her thoughts, just out of reach, urging her forward, beckoning her to take the next step. But Ariella hesitated. Something told her she was on the edge of something vast, something dangerous. Her mind raced, trying to piece together what little she knew. The fleet had no record of this ship. There were only rumors, fragmented tales whispered in the darkest corners of the galaxy, stories passed from one ship captain to another. No one had truly believed them. Until now. The door behind her creaked open, and she instinctively spun around, drawing her sidearm with practiced precision. She stopped herself when she saw the frail figure standing in the doorway, a man older than she had expected, his clothes ragged and his face etched with years of worry. His eyes, wild and bloodshot, locked onto hers with a gaze that felt both desperate and resigned. "You found it," the man rasped, his voice like gravel. "You shouldn't have found it. The eclipse. It has a mind of its own. You must leave, now." Ariel lowered her weapon slightly, though her fingers still trembled. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice firm despite the apprehension curling in her stomach. The man stepped forward, his thin frame casting a long shadow across the hangar. His movements were slow, deliberate, as though each step carried the weight of some unseen burden. "My name is Geraint," he said, his voice softer now. "I was the last captain of the eclipse. You must destroy it before it's too late." Ariel's mind reeled. The last captain? Had this man really been in charge of the ship that now lay before her? She glanced back at the ship, its dark surface gleaming in the dim light. How could anyone command such a thing? The very idea seemed inconceivable. She gestured for him to come closer. "You've seen what it can do?" she asked. "What is this ship? Why does it exist? How did it get here?" Geraint looked at her, his face tight with a mixture of fear and bitterness. He stepped up beside her, his eyes never leaving the eclipse. "I was a soldier once," he said, his voice low. "I was part of the fleet that discovered the eclipse over 100 years ago. It wasn't just a warship. It was something something we couldn't understand. We thought we could control it. We were wrong. Ariel stayed silent, listening intently as the man continued. We didn't know where it came from, Geraint said, his eyes distant, as if recalling painful memories. It wasn't of human design. It wasn't of any design we knew. When we first found it, we thought it was a weapon, an ancient relic of a lost race, a weapon of unimaginable power. But we were naive. We thought we could harness that power. We thought we could use it. He paused, his gaze turning inward. We were wrong. Ariel took a step closer to him, her voice softening. What happened? Geraint's eyes locked onto hers, his gaze dark with something unspoken. The eclipse doesn't work like any ship. It doesn't follow the laws of physics like the rest of us. It has its own will, and when it chooses a captain, he swallowed, his throat constricting. It doesn't just bend space and time. It bends the captain, too. Ariel felt a chill crawl up her spine as the gravity of his words began to settle in. This wasn't just a piece of lost technology. It was alive, and it wasn't something to be controlled. How do you know this? Ariel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel the weight of the question. She knew the answer, but she needed to hear it. Geraint's gaze turned to the eclipse once more, and his voice became heavy with sorrow. I was chosen. The eclipse chose me. It spoke to me just as it spoke to you. I thought I could master it, thought I could wield its power. But that's not how it works. It doesn't just give its power to anyone. It takes you. It molds you into something else, something different. And when you're in its grasp, you can never leave. It owns. He stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Ariel's. You don't understand the kind of power it holds. It can destroy entire star systems, erase them from existence, and more. And when the wrong hands wield it, the results are catastrophic. Ariel shook her head, disbelief mixing with the flickering fear inside her. Why didn't you destroy it then? Why leave it here, in this abandoned place? Geraint sighed deeply, a tired look crossing his features. I couldn't. The eclipse would not let me. It was more than a ship, more than a weapon. It was an entity, and it had claimed me. I'm still bound to it, in a way. Ariel studied his face, trying to find the truth behind his words. The eclipse, it wasn't just a ship, as she had suspected. It was something more, something alive. It had a consciousness, a will, and it chose its captains. But that choice came with a cost. The toll was high, and Geraint was living proof of it. What do you want me to do? Ariel asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to keep it steady. If it chooses me, what happens then? Geraint looked at her, his face a mix of desperation and grim acceptance. I can't tell you what happens. I can only warn you. If you accept it, if you let the eclipse bind itself to you, you will never be the same. Your mind, your soul, they will change. The eclipse will become a part of you, and it will use you. Even if you resist, it will twist you into something other. Ariel took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had come to investigate, to confirm what the rumors had whispered about this ship, but now she stood at the precipice of something far more profound and terrifying than she had anticipated. The eclipse was not merely a relic of the past. It was a living, breathing entity that could choose its commanders and alter their very essence. The weight of Geraint's words pressed down on her like a mountain. You will never be the same. The thought gnawed at her, filling her with both a sense of dread and an inexplicable allure. There was no question now. Whatever this ship was, it was far beyond anything she had ever faced. But the curiosity, the drive to understand, to control something this powerful, surged within her. She wasn't sure why, but she felt it. The same pull that had drawn Geraint to it so long ago. Ariel swallowed hard. "What happens if I refuse it?" she asked, her voice strained. Geraint's expression faltered, and for a moment he looked almost pitying. "If you refuse, it will let you go. But you won't be free. Not completely. The eclipse will leave a mark on you. It will always know you, always call to you, and you will never be able to escape its influence." Ariel's chest tightened. She wasn't sure if Geraint's words were a warning or a threat, but the weight of the decision pressed heavily on her. The eclipse was no mere warship. It was something beyond human understanding, and it wanted her. She turned back toward the ship, the darkness of its hull seeming to draw her in. A cold shiver ran down her spine, but it wasn't fear. It was something else, something that felt like destiny. "You had to know," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "I have to understand it." Geraint's voice trembled as he spoke, a final plea. "Be careful, Lieutenant. Once you answer the eclipse's call, there is no turning back." But Ariel's mind was already made up. She reached out, her fingers brushing the smooth surface of the eclipse once more. The ship hummed, a low, resonant vibration that filled her chest as though it were alive, welcoming her. And in that moment, Ariel knew that she had made her choice. Ariel stood frozen before the eclipse, her fingers still grazing its surface. The sensation of the ship under her touch had changed. No longer was it a cold metallic surface. Now it was alive, pulsating with energy that surged through her fingertips and up her arm. The hum of the ship resonated in the pit of her stomach, like a heartbeat, steady and all-encompassing. Geraint's warning echoed in her mind. "Once you answer the eclipse's call, there is no turning back." The words were a specter, hanging over her like a shadow. Yet, despite the danger, the pull of the ship was undeniable. It wasn't just the allure of its power. It was something deeper, something primal. The ship was calling to her, not just as a commander, but as something more. It was as though the eclipse had recognized her, chosen her, and she could not turn away. "Lieutenant Cade," Geraint's voice broke through her thoughts, his tone thick with urgency. "You don't understand. You can't control it. The eclipse doesn't just follow commands. It bends the universe to its will, and once it's in your blood, it's forever. You won't be you anymore. You'll become part of it." Ariel blinked, her mind hazy from the overwhelming sense of connection she felt to the ship. She could feel it in her chest, in her bones. The power was intoxicating, unlike anything she had ever experienced before. The weight of her decision pressed on her shoulders, but for reasons she couldn't fully explain, her desire to understand the eclipse, to unravel its secrets, was stronger than her fear. "I have to know," she said, more to herself than to Geraint. Her voice felt far away, as though the words were coming from someone else. "I need to understand it." Geraint stepped closer, his face contorting with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "Don't be a fool. It will destroy you just as it destroyed me." His voice broke, but there was no time for pity now. "It will take your mind, twist it, break it down until there's nothing left. I've seen it happen to others, and I can't stop it. I couldn't stop it from happening to me." Ariel's gaze never left the ship. She could feel the ship's awareness, the pull that tugged at her insides like a magnetic force. It was calling her, whispering her name. She could hear it now, clearer than ever. "Come to me, Ariel. You are mine." The voice filled her mind, warm and persuasive, like an ancient god beckoning its chosen vessel. It wasn't just words. It was a feeling, an overwhelming sense of belonging. Ariel's heart raced, a surge of something deep within her stirring. It was as though the ship knew her fears and her desires, and was offering her the very thing she had always sought: power, control, and answers. For a moment she faltered. Was she really ready to give herself to this ship, to let it consume her, to surrender to the unknown? Was it truly worth it, this price of becoming something more, something other? But the answer came to her unbidden. a rush of clarity that swept through her like a tide. The galaxy had always seemed so vast, so unfathomable, and she had always felt so small in comparison. She had always searched for meaning, for a way to break free from the constraints of her role as a soldier, a servant of the fleet. But here, with the eclipse, she could become something greater, something untouchable. "I accept," Ariella whispered, the words slipping from her lips before she could fully comprehend them. As soon as she spoke, the ship responded. The pulse under her fingers intensified, and a flash of light burst from the ship's surface, enveloping her in a wave of heat and energy. The force knocked her back, and for a moment, her vision blurred as the world spun around her. Then, all at once, everything became clear. She felt the ship's presence in her mind, felt it reaching into her consciousness like a river of energy, flowing through her veins, filling her thoughts, her very soul. She could hear the hum of its engines, the sound of space itself bending under its power. It was as though the ship's consciousness had fused with her own. Her heartbeat quickened, and her breath came in shallow gasps. The connection was immediate and overwhelming, like an embrace that both comforted and consumed her. "Ariel." The voice was gentle now, intimate, like the caress of a lover. "You are mine. We are one now." She felt a surge of warmth flood through her chest, her mind alight with visions of the ship's past, of its creation, its purpose. The eclipse was not just a weapon. It was something ancient, something born from the mind of an intelligence beyond human comprehension. It was a being unto itself, a godlike force that had waited eons for the right person to wield it. And now, that person was Ariel. "You are my chosen captain," the ship's voice continued, resonating in her mind. "Together we will shape the universe. Together we will bring the galaxy to its knees." The words were intoxicating, seductive, and Ariel felt herself surrender to them. She wasn't just piloting a ship anymore, she was becoming the ship. She could feel the vessel's every movement, every pulse of energy, as though she herself were one with it. The ship's will was her own, the galaxy's fate lay in her hands, and she was ready to embrace it. But as the power surged through her, a part of her, the rational, human part, fought back, screaming for control. She could feel it, deep within herself, a dark, twisted part of the eclipse trying to take root in her mind. It was the same force that had consumed Garant and countless others before him. The ship did not just grant power, it consumed the mind, bending it to its will. The warmth in her chest began to turn to heat, then to pain. Her head throbbed, and she staggered back, clutching her temples. The eclipse had chosen her, but at what cost? "No," she gasped, struggling to pull herself free from the ship's grasp. But the connection was too strong. She could feel the ship's will tightening around her, pulling her deeper into its embrace. It was like drowning, like sinking into a black hole that consumed everything in its path. Geraint's voice echoed in her ears, as though a lifeline from her past. "Fight it, Lieutenant. You don't understand. You can't control it. It will break you." But his words were distant, fading, as the ship's power filled her senses completely. She was no longer herself. She was part of something else. Part of the eclipse. In that moment, she realized the truth. There was no escaping the ship. She had accepted its call, and now there was no turning back. The eclipse had consumed her, and in return, it had given her its power. The pain slowly subsided, replaced by a strange sense of clarity. Her mind, once her own, now felt connected to something greater. She could see the galaxy in ways she never had before, its systems, its civilizations, its potential. She could feel the flow of time, the threads of fate twisting and turning beneath her fingers. The universe was a vast machine, and she, Ariel Cade, was now one of its gears. The vision cleared, and she stood tall, her eyes wide with newfound awareness. She was no longer just a lieutenant, a soldier, a cog in the machine of the fleet. She was something more. She was the captain of the Eclipse, and she was no longer bound by the laws of reality. Geraint stood frozen behind her, his eyes wide with horror. No, you've let it take you." Ariel turned to face him, her expression unreadable. There was no fear in her gaze now, no hesitation. The eclipse had taken root in her soul, and she welcomed it. "You were wrong, Geraint," she said softly, her voice now laced with an unnatural calm. "I'm not afraid. I understand now. The galaxy is mine to command." The ship responded to her words with a low, resonant hum, like a living creature satisfied with its choice. Ariel's heart raced, but now it was no longer fear that surged through her veins. It was power, clarity, and an overwhelming sense of purpose. She stepped forward, her hand outstretched. The eclipse answered her call, its systems coming to life as though they had been waiting for this moment. And as she stood there, her body thrumming with the energy of the ship, Ariel Cade knew that the galaxy would never be the same again. She had embraced the power of the eclipse. She was its captain now, and together they would reshape the stars.